So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto has vowed to protect everyone, including FemHaku. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. His strength fled. The cold, dark world he'd stepped into encroached around him, barely leaving him with the power to even hold his blade. A shadowy, writhing limb smashed into him, his body buckling beneath the force, his arm snapping like a twig. He would have screamed had there been any air in his lungs. His body hit the ground, tumbling and spinning as he tried to keep his grip on his blade, the weapon slipping from his grasp as he came to a stop. He nearly faded from the world of the living, lances of pain firing from his arm, his breathing strained. He struggled to raise his hand enough to reach for the weapon. To hold onto the eddies of thought amidst the corrupting power now encroaching around him. Somewhere he found the strength to raise himself again. He panted, struggling to remain upright even as he stared into the darkest of voids, luminous red eyes following his movements as the beast stalked forward, growling in hate. Dark power gathered, a brief coalescence of non-light swirling before it erupted in a stream of dark fire. This time, the Night Artorias did scream. The pain was immediate, blinding, overwhelming, maddening. He felt the power scorching his mind, his whole world turning to little more than insane, pain-filled howls. He thrashed and writhed on the ground, struggling to hold onto some semblance of thought, every fleeting string of consciousness slipping through his fingers like fine sand as the abyss threatened to swallow him whole. In the end it was only images he could grasp. Though, his noble trusted friend and confidant. Ornstein, his rival, his commander, the most honorable knight in the court. Little Guinevere who had the brightest of smiles that could outshine the most resplendent of days. His Lord Gwyn. Magnificent and regal, just and proud. Sif, his friend, his companion, ever by his side even within the darkness of the abyss. Siren. He held onto her face, grasping the memory with the will Ornstein had once praised to be stronger than the most tempered steel. Gripped it as he held his weapon tight. He was weakened, battered, his sword was heavy, his lungs burning with the cold, unnatural air of this place, as dark power spread over him, seeking to swallow him. Siren. With a roar the knight charged, his legendary greatsword slicing into the beast's hide, its shadowy limbs seeking to bat him away before he dodged, ducking and weaving before that same blade sliced the tendrils of dark power that formed the limb. Manus roared, and Artorias attacked again, hacking and hammering away at the dark god, relentless in what would be his last battle, pushing through injury and agony to destroy this monster. He had to. To halt the spread of the abyss. He would keep it away from his friends. He would keep them all safe. He would protect them. He roared. In the world above, a bellowing cry was heard. And the father of the abyss whom was so close to gaining a new servant now found himself losing instead. He would protect everyone. Uzumaki Naruto found himself panting, lying flat on his back as he stared up at the stubborn tree that refused to just let him run its length up to the top. Overgrown fern. He wheezed, glaring, still irritated by his confrontation with Inari. Stupid bra. But the sound that felt like it was splitting his skull in two with a hatchet. Naruto sat up, clutching at his suddenly bleeding ears as he screamed, his eyes closed tight before dirt and rocks pelted him where he sat. He curled up in a ball, trying to drown out the agony spearing his brain before the noise finally stopped, as quickly as it had come. He sat there, huddled in on himself as he gulped down air, his heart hammering hard in his chest. Finally, he found the strength to look up, tears of pain leaking from his eyes, even as the bleeding in his ears stopped. There was a man there, or at least, it looked like a man, the biggest man Naruto had ever laid eyes on. 12 feet tall at least, a jagged trench had been carved into the earth leading up to him, meaning he'd most likely caused it when landing. He stumbled, getting to his feet as he approached. The figure was clad in heavy, glimmering armor, tarnished only by black stains that littered its surface, the once noble blue cloth that had decorated it in little more than tattered rags. Naruto noticed its arm resting at an awkward angle, clearly broken. Its breaths, from what he was starting to hear as the ringing in his ears faded to a dull throb, was heavy and wet, like blood was churning in its lungs. He stepped closer, the creature having not yet noticed him. Naruto, get back. He turned, finding Kakashi hobbling towards him, still weakened from chakra exhaustion, Sasuke and Sakura beside him in their sleepwear, kunai and shuriken pouches, hastily strapped to their thighs. The blonde moved to obey, but before he could, the giant, with its mangled broken arm, reached out, grabbing him in a hand that fisted his whole shirt, the fabric near tearing, but holding enough for the armored behemoth to drag him closer despite his sudden, hasty struggles. Sasuke. Sakura, flank it. Kakashi barked, do not engage until I give the order. His two genin did as asked, staring wide-eyed at the creature that held Naruto in an unshakable grip. Human. The sudden foreign thought entered his mind with the subtlety of a Kaiten jutsu. Naruto froze, his struggles ceasing as he looked up, the dragon-shaped helmet obscuring the wearer that looked down at him, even from a laying position. Can Ruager. The voice growled, the body thrashing, its head smashing into the bark of a tree at its back, sending chunks of wood and splinters flying to pelt Naruto's face as he renewed his struggles. The guttural, inhuman tone it had become mid-speech convincing him more than anything else that he was in true danger. The beast's hand tightened on his shirt and Naruto wished for once his jumpsuit would just tear, his teammate's presence doing little to console him. The thing focused on him again. I can't fight it anymore. Manus is weakened but soon, I will be consumed by them by the dark. Naruto felt himself being lifted, his feet thrashing in the air as this thing moved its broken arm to lift him. He wondered just how strong this whatever it was had to be in order to raise a nearly 100-pound child with a broken limb. Then Naruto saw something else, it was moving its other arm, a monstrous greatsword, twice the size of Zabuza's at the very least, the hilt was pointed towards him. Surely the voice sounded weaker now, pained, as though struggling to place the words. Thine kind are more than pure dark. I was not strong enough. Its grip on him slackened, allowing Naruto to stand, now over the creature's stomach, as it fully released him for a second, before its massive hand gripped his arm, moving to place Naruto's hand on the hilt of the blade. Thou must be. Then it paused, seemingly staring into nothing before it turned to Naruto again. I beg of thee. His hand was placed upon the hilt, the metal so cold it nearly burned, a horrible empty feeling spreading through his body as he tried to pull away from it. The spread of the abyss must be stopped. Naruto finally found it in him to speak. What the hell is the abyss? Naruto, what's wrong? Kakashi shouted from where he stood, still trying to find the best way to get his student out without endangering his life. I don't. Ah, Sif. There you are. He turned his head back to the thing, its head slumped. He was too inexperienced to recognize the delirium of death for what it was. Siren, all of you forgive me. For I have availed you nothing. I try. The thing slumped, its armored joints clacking as it went limp, its hand falling from the hilt of its massive sword that half rested on his leg, half in Naruto's own hands. Naruto, come here now. That back dope. Naruto, move it. Before Naruto could listen to any of his teammates, the thing's body glowed, glimmers of stardust shining so bright it was nearly blinding, not a glimmer of dark. He was so enraptured he didn't even notice the weight of the sword becoming lighter in his hands. Then he felt as though he'd been kicked by a mule, the air exploding from his lungs as he flew back, Kakashi barely able to leap and catch him in time as the light entered his student's chest, becoming one with the fallen creature. Becoming one with the soul of the night Artorias. The Kyuubi no Kitsune snarled, carefully pouring its endless supply of chakra through the seal into his host's body, feeling out the foreign power that sought to fester within his host like a fungus. His power clashed with whatever this was, seeking to purge it from where it had taken root. But even as he did, he could see the patterns and weaves, the fabric of this beast twining itself with that of the worthless Nijin. He would not be able to eliminate it. But there was only room enough for one of them here. The nine tails focused, its immense power subjugating this alien entity, keeping it from affecting his host in any way. That was his place. The nine tails soon enough returned to its slumber, and the dark of the abyss was held away from the boy's soul. Kakashi sighed, looking over his feverish student once more. His forehead was scorching, his chakra a chaotic mess, and the sword was still firmly in the boy's grip. He tried to pry it off, but the blade was so cold it had seared the unprotected skin of his fingers. The feeling of death had crept up his arm so violently he was sure he almost had died. He pulled back his hand so fast he'd nearly smacked Sasuke across the face with emotion. Naruto's grip on the thing was like a vice, completely unbreakable even for him without severing the hand entirely. The only thing that was keeping Kakashi from doing so was the small consolation that, for one thing, Naruto's hand was not showing signs of similar damage and that the Kyuubi would most certainly avoid his host's death. They had to get him inside though, under a blanket to sweat off the fever and some ice to place on his head to keep his brain cool. Sasuke, Sakura, grab his legs, stay away from that sword, whatever it is, it's dangerous. Throughout the night the blonde had shivered, caught in the grip of fever sleep. Kakashi had sensed spikes in his chakra, the signature altering and changing for small snippets of time. And still his hand held onto that sword like a vice. It was heavy, the whole team could attest to that after having dragged Naruto with it through nearly 100 yards of dirt and grass to get to Tazuna's house. How Naruto was able to keep such an ungodly grip on the thing was a mystery. But perhaps one that would soon be moot. With the clank of steel striking wood, the blade was released. Kakashi watched his student Sasuke and Sakura perking up from where they'd been waiting somewhat anxiously. Naruto's eyes fluttered open, greeted by Kakashi's signature eye smile. Nice of you to join us. The whiskered blonde sat up, blinking at his sensei and teammates. Kakashi-sensei. He blinked some more, looking to Sakura and Sasuke. What's up? How'd I get here? You don't remember? Kakashi asked, pressing the back of his hand to Naruto's sweat-drenched forehead, his temperature once more, perfectly normal. The fever hadn't so much as broken as it had vanished without a trace. Naruto racked his brain, thinking for a long moment before his eyes widened. That big guy with the swow. He looked down, noticing the nearly 5-foot greatsword resting beside him, bits of its length were chipped, covered in black, ink-like stains. Kakashi nodded. Yes, the guy with the big sword that only you can touch. Naruto looked up at that, staring at his sensei and both teammates. Huh? None of you can touch it. His answer was a series of head shakes. Sakura spoke up. The thing's so cold it burns like dry ice, only a lot worse. Huh? Really? He reached down, gripping the hilt. It was cold to the touch, but nothing unbearable. Naruto. Kakashi drew his attention back to him. What happened last night? The blonde scrunched up his face in thought, then he shook his head. It was weird. One second I'm trying to get up that damn tree again, the next there's this horrible sound. Kakashi nodded. We heard it too. It's what woke us up, even if it hadn't. I haven't sensed energy that powerful in. He looked down at Naruto's stomach for a second. A long time. The blonde pretended not to notice. Yeah, well, then I see that big guy just lying there. He looked real hurt, so I tried to see if he was okay. You saw him, right? He did look hurt. Kakashi nodded. And then you guys got there. The sensei of Team 7 nodded again. Yes, but you shouted at him, Naruto. Don't you remember? You asked what was the abyss. Like a light bulb going off in his head, he did remember. Hey, yeah. He spoke to me. I didn't hear anything. Sasuke put in, raising an eyebrow from his place by the window. Me neither. Kakashi shrugged. It could be a form of telepathy. He answered his students, such techniques aren't unheard of but are extremely rare. Naruto's face crunched up again. He basically said the spread of the abyss must be stopped. What's the abyss, sensei? Kakashi shook his head. Your guess is as good as mine. I've never heard of such a thing. But he sounded really worried, and whatever could do that to him must be real dangerous. I mean, did you guys see how he picked me up with a broken arm? That was totally badass. Kakashi's sweat dropped at Naruto's obvious admiration for his odd attacker, but tried to smile for his student nevertheless, as Sakura berated his assessment of the situation as being dangerous, not badass. Well, it doesn't matter now. He said, standing up with a grimace. Another day or so and he'd be back to full form, but for now, come on, let's go back to the forest. Naruto, grabbed that sword of yours. Minutes later the three were back at the clearing. The signs of their late night visitor were still somewhat fresh. Kakashi walked up to the scarred landscape, his students following. Kakashi-sensei, look, black stains. Sakura pointed out. The copycat nodded. Numerous black, ink-like stains, not unlike what speckled the surface of Naruto's sword, were spread across the ground where the thing from last night had fallen. He knelt, taking a stick and poking at one of the larger marks he could see. Immediately, the tip of the wooden instrument became pitch black, its body hollowing to brittle, rotten wood. The copy ninja raised an eyebrow, pulling away and making sure all his students did the same. Stay far away from those stains. He turned to Naruto, still holding the sword, all but dragging the tip on the ground. It was too big and heavy a weapon for him, but the boy would have to swing it at least once. He needed to see this. Reaching down to his pouch, he unsealed a simple bamboo scroll. The old, dried wood, rolled up, would serve as an adequate dummy to mimic a human limb. Naruto, attack the scroll. The blonde nodded, then looked at the tall blade like he was trying to figure out how to do it before grunting and hefting the slab of steel onto his shoulder. But the sprint, the young blonde swung at the rolled-up wood lying on the ground. Kakashi watched, increasingly impressed as the blade, out of control and lacking speed and thus power, nevertheless carved though the whole scroll with laughable ease. That weapon was powerful, or at the very least sharper than most swords could ever dream to be. But still nothing on that blade that seemed to cause a similar reaction as that stick had to the stain. As far as technique went, there was no way the boy would be able to get it to even a modicum of acceptable by the time Zabuza was fully recovered and ready to attack in the next few days, but maybe he could at least get the Jinchuriki to swing in a straight line without looking like he was going to trip over his own feet while doing it. Naruto panted, exhausted as every muscle and bone ached in his upper body, overtaxed and overcharged with chakra he'd been channeling through his arms, back and waist to have enough strength to swing the massive blade properly. He tried to raise the massive blade one more time, only for his arms to all but give out on him, nearly hurting himself as the blade tried to find the fastest way down, his arms with it. He felt a hand on his shoulder, looking up to see Kakashi standing there, smiling. Come on. You did well for today. Now you can swing somewhat decently. Tomorrow we'll head to the bridge and get this mission over with. Naruto smiled, nodding at his sensei. Hey, you think we could get this thing clean when we get back to Konoha-sensei? See if we can get some of these weird black stains off. Kakashi nodded. Tell you what, I'll buy you some proper cleaning oils when we're back, eh? The boy's smile could have lit up the night. The next morning saw Team 7 at Tazuna's dining room table, eating while everyone was eating. Naruto was more, inhaling his food, rather than consuming it like a normal human, ignoring the disgusted look from Sasuke who was sitting across from him, and so had a front row seat to the horror show. It was Tazuna that spoke up, slurping down some last remnants of cereal, or was that sake from his bowl. So what's with the sword, kiddo? Naruto paused mid-bite, realizing he was being addressed. He shrugged, talking with his mouth half full. Dunno. Big guy gave it to millimeters. Don't talk with your mouth full, Naruto. Kakashi chided. This time, the blonde swallowed sheepishly. Sorry, sensei. Sensei. It was Sakura that spoke. Well, I was thinking, what if he already lost to you once? What if Zabuza decides to attack the house? Kakashi med, seemingly in thought. Truth be told, half of him had expected that, and it'd really work to his advantage if Zabuza did. Hostages were valuable only if the person cared about their safety. His job was to protect Tazuna, not Tazuna and his family. It was cold to use them as bait, especially since it would most likely end in severe injury at best. Vowed. Now that Sakura mentioned it, Tazuna was definitely going to want his family protected. You've got a point. He said, as though the thought had never occurred to him. It had never occurred to Tazuna either, given how pale he'd gotten. Tsunami-san. He called. Yes. She answered from the upstairs rooms. Could you and Inari go stay in a friend's house for the day? I suppose. She came into view, looking down at the Jounin and her father. Why? Just a safety precaution. He answered, smiling pleasantly. She nodded, a nervous tension in her before she went on with the rest of her work, trying to pretend everything was normal, and her father may very well not come home tonight. By the time the team reached the bridge, the mist was already heavy in the air. The copy nin wasted no time unveiling his Sharingan eye, the three tomos spinning within the red iris. Remember, your duty is to protect Tazuna, he whispered to his genin, each of them taking up formation around Tazuna with Naruto drawing the massive sword from his back. Kakashi was mildly surprised to see Naruto actually rest the body of the blade on the floor, conserving his energy, rather than try to hold it aloft. It wasn't exactly an advantage, but given that he wouldn't be that much faster with the blade in a proper swinging position unlike a trained swordsman, it'd work for now. But the burst of chakra, he dispelled a good portion of the mist around them, allowing Tazuna and the students to see the dead or unconscious workers around them. It was Kakashi's warning that saved them. Move. The man turned, his students already bolting as he grabbed Tazuna by the scruff of his jacket and dragged the man out of the path of Kubakirabacho. The great sword smashing into the ground, cleaving rock and cut stone. Zabuza stood behind the blade, grinning beneath his bandages. Kakashi spread out his senses, searching for that hunter nin that must be close by. Sakura, behind you. The pinket turned, her hand wrapped around a kunai hilt as her green eyes tried to track the blurred movement of her attacker. Then a sword came down in front of her eyes. But the smash of steel over stone, Naruto's blade was between her and the hunter nin, the raven-haired nuke nin reeling back before Sasuke was all over him, their speed matched as the Uchiha slashed and thrust with kunai knives countered by delicate senbon. Naruto hefted his blade, ready to go aid the last Uchiha before, with a swirl of water, a clone of Zabuza was standing in front of him, looking at the sword in his hand with a smile. So the little brat likes to play with swords now. Naruto remembered the amount of punishment even a clone with 1/8 the power of the real Zabuza had been able to inflict on him and his clones in the last fight. This was not gonna be easy. He was struck by an idea. It's sweet, right? Here, look. He tossed it up to the surprised clone, who caught it merely out of reflex before the burning cold of the weapon's hilt forced it to dispel. Naruto caught his weapon, never noticing Zabuza's comical expression at the brief exchange. Kakashi nearly cutting his throat open as he stumbled in surprise at having his clone die so stupidly. Boy team, don't get killed before I can get there to rescue you. And rescue is exactly what Sasuke found himself needing. Shortly after he'd managed to get the upper hand in the Taijutsu exchange, the hunter nin had proven himself able to deduce he was going to lose and had broken away far enough to now use this. The dome of ice mirrors. As he saw his fire jutsu fade away with little more to show for his efforts than a half-melted mirror that quickly regained its previous shape and consistency, Sasuke saw the hunter nin appear on each of the slabs of reflective ice. And now, Sasuke's opponent said, in a voice he couldn't wholly tell as either being male or female, brandishing a handful of senbon. You die. But before a single needle could be loosed, a loud yell drew their attention towards a fast-approaching Naruto, his blade held up and ready to swing down on a mirror. It won't break, dope. Sasuke shouted, trying to avoid his teammate wasting his energy and needlessly leaving an opening by swinging at an unbreakable wall. To his immense surprise, the dark great sword carved through the ice mirror like it was delicate glass. To his utter astonishment, the hunter nin howled in agony, every mirror shattering a second later as the nuke nin fell out of one particular mirror, writhing on the ground, the porcelain mask doing nothing to conceal the pain coursing through every fiber of his body as limbs twitched and convulsed. To the two pre-teens, it was actually pretty horrifying. But as Naruto drew closer, close enough for the mist to no longer be a factor, he felt himself freezing in his tracks as he caught sight of the screaming form on the ground. Siren. The thought came unbidden, nothing in his mind ever even registering the fact that he'd never heard that name before, much less feel the pain lance across his chest at the sight of the screaming woman. He ran towards her, and it would only be much later that he would recognize these thoughts as not being his own. He knelt beside her, ignoring Sasuke's warning shout as he reached down, holding the woman in place as he reached towards the mask, pulling it off to reveal her eyes, filled with bloody tears to go with what was bubbling up from the side of her lips. "Naruto, move." It was Kakashi's voice this time, and the confused blonde only had time to look up and see Zabuza, the real one this time. A palpable fury in his eyes as he stared down at him. The killing intent froze him on the spot, the very specter of death looming over him like a monolith as Kubakurabacho fell like the wrath of an angry god. "Wah!" Naruto cried, barely rolling to the side in time to avoid having himself cleaved in two. He didn't avoid Zabuza's kick though. But the snap of ribs and a dislocated shoulder and thrown out knee, Naruto came to a stop, utterly dazed, blinking, he tried to get the world to focus. He wondered where he was and what was going on, struggling to stay conscious. To his addled brain he could have been lying there for days, he barely even recognized Izuna picking him up before everything went dark. He hated the dark. It was a day later when the dark would finally recede, allowing him to see the smiling face of his sensei hovering over him. "Hello, sunshine." Naruto went to move, feeling every limb flare up in agony. He tried to scream, what emerged was something between a croak and a wheeze. "Don't try moving," Kakashi said. "Zabuza-sen was quite peeved at you. You had a thrown-out knee, a dislocated shoulder, 3 broken ribs, a chipped tooth, a broken wrist and some bruising on your stomach." As he went reciting the injuries, it was as though each one decided to respond as they were called out, making Naruto's body sing with waves of pain. "And all from one kick too," Kakashi drawled before looking off to the side. "And the big bad demon says he doesn't care." Naruto wondered what the hell Kakashi was talking about when another voice responded, one that made him damn near die of a coronary on the spot. "Shut it, Haddock." Naruto paled, the pupil of his eye becoming thin as a pinprick as he slowly turned his head to the source of the voice, finding that vengeful death god once more looming over him, seemingly as tall as a mountain from halfway across the room. The terrified blonde inched closer to his sensei, fighting through the pain to gain those extra inches of comfort. "Don't worry, Naruto." Kakashi patted his head like the man didn't have a care in the world or that there wasn't a homicidal nuke nin barely 8 feet across from them. "We're best friends with Zabuza now. Aren't we, Zabuza? I'll carve your eyes out of your skull and feed them to you." "The best?" Kakashi exclaimed, completely unperturbed much to his student's concern. The copy ninja let the blonde squirm for a while longer before he spoke. "I suppose you want to know what happened, eh?" Naruto nodded. "Well, it starts like this, after Zabuza took you out, we kept fighting for a while, between protecting Haku-chan from me and Sasuke we were starting to wear him down when Gato showed up with an army ready to kill Zabuza and raid the town so he didn't have to pay. Zabuza politely asked them to leave and they left. After that he was a bit tired and bleeding so we tied him up and brought him here with Haku-chan. With Gato dead Zabuza has no reason to kill the bridge builder. And he's stuck around with us because of what you did to Haku." Naruto blinked, deducing that Haku must be the nuke nin. He remembered a flash of blood-leaking eyes and screams. "What did I do to Haku?" Kakashi looked up at Zabuza. "See. I told you he wouldn't know." Suddenly, a shadow fell over the blonde, and before he had time to realize it, Zabuza was standing over him. The Kiri swordsman grabbed him by the scruff of his collar, hauling him up off the ground, every limb screaming in agony at the sudden movement. Now's Abu-chan play nice," Kakashi said, and Naruto realized his sensei was now standing behind the man, a kunai blade cutting into the swordsman's neck. His voice, though friendly and careless, held an edge of warning to it. Zabuza paid no heed to the blade that could end his life in a second, pulling Naruto closer until their noses were almost touching. "You made her own chakra attack her. Nearly killing her from the inside out." Naruto's eyes widened. I did." Seeing the genuine confusion and even horror in the boy's face, Zabuza snarled in contempt, tossing the boy to the floor where he was caught by a timely shadow clone of Kakashi that set his student down with a smile, as though nothing was amiss. The Kiri nin stormed out of the room, all but snapping the door in two as it fell off its tracks. It was minutes later Kakashi found himself smiling at the man who stood outside of the house, breathing heavily as though trying to rein in his temper. "I told you he wouldn't be able to reverse it," he sing-songed. Zabuza turned, glaring at him for all he was worth. He looked away, rolling his tongue as if trying to conjure up the will to speak the word somewhere. She'll be protected. Kakashi let himself become serious. Both of you. I'll do everything in my power to make sure she gets the best treatment. And after? I can't promise what comes after. Kakashi answered truthfully. You'll have to speak to the Hokage. Only he can decide what comes after. The nuke ninja scratched at his head, snarling. At least you're bloody honest. He stared at the copy nin for another second before pulling Kubikiri from his back and stabbing it into the ground. Fine. Get this shit over with before I change my mind. The copy nin nodded. Nearly a week later, Hiruzen Sarutobi could safely say that he had seen many things in his long life. But a rookie genin team arriving with such a boon like Momochi's Zabuza and a member of the near-extinct Hyoten bloodline of Kiri, after leaving for a simple C rank, was reaching pretty high on the list of strange things. Still, he gave no further reaction than a deep breath, inhaling the smoke from his pipe and exhaling again before speaking. I see. He smiled softly at the three genin. You three handled yourselves well. The mission pay will be up to that of an A rank. A substantial amount for 3 aspiring shinobi, I'm sure. He was rewarded with enthusiastic smiles. 1 A rank mission's pay was the equivalent of 10 D rank missions. Nearly half a month's worth of pay in one sitting was something that could get anyone to smile. Sarutobi chuckled. Now why don't the three of you head down to get in line to receive your payment? Kakashi will come down with the documentation to affirm the up in rank in a moment. The genin nodded, 2 of them realizing they were being dismissed in a not so subtle way, while the last was fantasizing about how much ramen he would be able to buy with the pay from this mission. As soon as the 3 left, the smile fell from Sarutobi's face to let his neutral, almost bored expression to once more shine through as he blew out wisps of gray smoke. Momochi's Zabuza. The professor sighed, as though tasting the name on the smoke. Let's start with why you chose to surrender peacefully in the first place. He made a gesture, and an Anbu seemed to morph out of the very walls of his office, a boar-masked female marching closer to Haku, her hands glowing with green chakra. Lie down please. The woman said, her tone brusque, and Haku inched a little closer to Zabuza, too frightened of these strangers around her to not show it in some way. The demon of the bloody mist looked at his apprentice. Get down. She hesitated for another moment before she slowly set herself down on the ground, removing her mask and trying not to stiffen as the Anbu untied her sash and opened her robes to reveal the chakra suppressant seals over her stomach and chest. The Hokage marched around his desk, now looming over her with Kakashi and Zabuza. You subdued all her chakra. It was Kakashi who nodded. It was all we could think of after we realized her chakra was attacking her body from the inside out. Can you fix it? Zabuza growled. Sarutobi took another puff of his pipe, unperturbed by the man's impatience. There are techniques that can have similar effects, and so yes, there are known counteragents, but I've never heard of a blade that could do it without touching anyone. Actually, we have a theory about that. Kakashi put in, smiling. Haku-chan's he ignored Zabuza's growl. Mirrors are constructs fueled by her chakra. Unlike a clone where you just dump the chakra and that's that, she had to constantly feed her chakra into these constructs, and with one sudden destruction, what remained of the chakra inside it would go back to her, correct? Hiruzen nodded, catching on. I see. You're suggesting that because the weapon had direct contact with her chakra before she assimilated it into her coils. Then the blade was able to make her chakra go wild inside her coils. Like a poison. It has a very different effect on living flesh though. That made Hiruzen raise an eyebrow. You tested it? A small rodent. The copycat answered. It bled for a while, it actually seemed like the injury took longer to clot, but I'm no expert on rat physiology, so I couldn't tell you for sure. Within 2 hours it was showing signs of infection. I'd say it looked like leprosy, its fur fell off around the injury, its skin developed boils and pustules, by the 3rd hour it was clearly dying, all its fur had fallen off, and the infection had spread throughout half its body. It took 5 hours to ultimately die from a small nick, but by the end it was horrible. In what way? It almost seemed like it had been decomposing for days, bloated, bits of skin tissue falling off, its eyes were nothing more than whites with foam coming out of its mouth. He pulled out a piece of paper, handing it to the aged leader. The remains. See if the med-nins can get an autopsy and say exactly what happened. Sarutobi took the slip, eyeing it with curiosity. Interesting. I trust you'll be looking to further Naruto's training with that weapon, since he seems to be the only one capable of wielding it. Kakashi nodded. I was actually gonna ask you if Mito Guy's team could be placed near the bottom of the mission dockets for the next 3 months. Trying to get your team ready for the exams then. The question was rhetorical as Sarutobi mulled over the prospect of taking 2 genin teams off the roster. If this blade could really be that powerful, then Naruto could certainly put up one of the better shows for the exam, increasing their clientele, and Mito Guy's team was already very strong from what he'd heard. If two teams could dominate the exams, the clout would be worth a backlog of two teams off the roster. Alright. But your team, the whole team will begin training with Guy and his genin, and you will help train Guy's genin, should he ask it of you in Re 2. There was a whimper beneath them, and his and Kakashi's conversation was forgotten as the Anbu undid the chakra suppressant seals, with Haku now squirming in pain at their feet while the boar-masked woman scanned her patient. The Hokage, Kakashi, Zabusa and Haku waited. The former two with patience, the latter of them anxious. Finally, the woman completed her scan, reapplying the seals easily, allowing Haku to calm once more. She stood, barely even managing to straighten before Zabusa was all but in her face. Can it be fixed? The woman nodded, not backing an inch. It can be. The attack is focusing on the first 5 gates, corrupting her chakra as it passes through the body's natural barriers. By carefully forcing open each one, the influx of chakra should effectively purge her entire system like a flash flood. Then what are you waiting for? For us to discuss terms, Zabusa-san. Sarutobi answered, turning his back on the Chunin to walk back around his desk. He took a moment to stamp a form before handing it to Kakashi. For your team. He said, dismissing the man who bowed at the waist, striding out of the office without a care in the world. You to please take Haku-san here to the hospital. Inform them of her conditions. He emphasized the plural status of the word. Though clearly, neither of the Kiri ninja liked it, neither one put up much protest, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that this was neither the time and especially not the place. They waited for Haku to dress herself, Yuta actually helping the girl with the complicated knots of her sash before walking out of the office, leaving Zabusa staring at the older man who seemed perfectly content to keep smoking his pipe, eyes closed in a tranquility. The minutes ticked by in silence, Sarutobi perfectly content to let the man wait on his leisure to begin the conversation or to be the first one of them to crack, and Zabusa stubbornly refusing to give in to the old man's mind games. Finally, as Sarutobi threw out the burnt ashes of his pipe weed, he looked at the Kiri swordsman. I find myself in a most curious situation, Mamachi-san. And that is? I currently hold the man with the second largest bounty from Kiri standing in my office, leader of a rebellious faction that is responsible for Kiri's current civil war, along with his apprentice, whom is a Hyoten wielder. I could make this village a lot of money by turning just you over. Just cut the bullshit and say whatever the hell you wanted to say, you decrepit shit. The Kiri nin snarled, aware of the rising killing intent from the surrounding Anbu. No one spoke like that to the Hokage. Sarutobi, however, remained unflappable. You have 2 choices before you. The first is that I give you a place here. You are an A-rank ninja, master of the silent killing technique, wielder of one of Kiri's legendary blades. Your name alone will bring much prestige. My medics heal your apprentice, enroll her as an active ninja, though her rank will be decided on further inspection of her skills, and allow you both to live and work for us here. There will be a 3-year probationary period for you, in which a tracking seal will be placed on you, and your movements within certain areas of the village will be limited, but that should not be too unbearable. And what's the second option? You die before you can ever reach for your blade. I sell you back to Kurigakure and then use the money from your corpse to turn your apprentice into a breeding mule for Konoha's new Hyoten bloodline. Zabusa's head tilted, slightly surprised by the seemingly pleasant old man's brutality. Then again, a veneer of civility always hid the blackest hearts. Why even offer me a choice at all? I could always run after the 3 years in option 1. Sarutobi gave no outward reaction to that statement, merely replying with, I would prefer to avoid barbarism. Wouldn't you? All people, including your Haku, deserve a chance at happiness, and I'd rather not take that from her. Besides, we hold the greatest trackers in the world. The Hyuga, the Inyazuka, the Abiram. Believe me, there are too few people we cannot find. And we are not a country whittling away its strength in civil war. Should you run, you will die, your bounty will be collected, and should your apprentice be with you, then she will be subjected to option number 2 when we bring her back. Zabusa sneered. Always heard you tree huggers were gentle shits. Guess I was wrong. Oh, this is me being gentle. Sarutobi said as though it should have been obvious. I offered you options, didn't I? The old man half coughed, half laughed at his own joke. After you've filled out the adequate paperwork, you'll come back here. I have your first assignment ready for you. The next day found Team 7 at the bridge with Sakura trying to chat up Sasuke doing his best to ignore her, and Naruto scrubbing at these black stains over the blade that simply refused to come off, even with the special oils Kakashi had bought for him like he promised. The rest of the blade all but gleamed, but these black stains stuck on there like the most stubborn ink blotches in the history of mankind. If he wasn't afraid it'd rust, he'd have dunked this thing in bleach for a day or something. At the 3-hour mark, Kakashi appeared on the bridge in a swirl of leaves. You're late. Sakura and Naruto screamed, more out of habit than any real irritation. Mama, sorry, but my heat was shut off so I had to stay home to keep my snake warm. You don't have a snake. Kakashi's eye glimmered. Elsewhere a purple-haired Jounin sneezed. Well, at any rate I'm here now and I've got some big news. The copy nin smiled, watching as each of his students perked up, interested at what could have their teacher so excited. What's up, sensei? Well, my cute little Genin, the Chunin exam is in 3 months' time. He explained. And as such I'd like to nominate you all. He was forced to pause as Naruto began to shout excitedly at the top of his lungs. He waited a good 5 seconds before Sakura punched the boy hard enough to get him to sit still. But I'm only nominating you if I think you're ready. So we're gonna use these 3 months to get ready. Sasuke, Sakura. Both Genin stood up a little straighter, approaching Kakashi as the man gestured for them to come closer. Sakura, Sasuke, you two are with me. Naruto. Yeah? The blonde questioned, worried he was going to be left out after Kakashi had singled out his 2 teammates. You need to learn how to use that sword. So I got you the perfect teacher. You did? Really? Naruto's enthusiasm once more reared its head. Kakashi smiled. Yup. Someone who's something of an expert on using big swords. Naruto's smile fell, a cold feeling of dread crawling up his spine. Wait, you don't mean. A hand fell over his shoulder, a gray-skinned hand. Sasuke and Sakura's frightened faces told him the whole story before he dreadfully turned his head to look. The next instant Naruto was by Kakashi's feet, all but hugging the man's ankle. Kakashi. Don't do this to me. Don't leave me with him. Kakashi-sensei, he'll eat me. Now Naruto, it won't be that bad. Eat me? The blonde hissed before he felt a hand clamp around his ankle. Naruto, you and Zabuza will get along great, I'm sure of it. Won't you, Zabuza? Zabuza's laughter would haunt Naruto's nightmares forever as he was dragged away from his teammates. Even Sasuke was throwing him a look of sympathy. Minutes later Zabuza tossed Naruto into a tree, the Genin's back smacking solidly against the wood, his head whipping back and smacking into the hard surface, causing the boy to hiss and rub his head in pain. When he looked up it was to see Zabuza standing there, glaring at him as though willing his eyes to burn the Genin to cinders beneath his gaze. Alright, listen here, punk. I don't like you, I most likely never will like you. You're the reason I'm an all but an indentured servant in this miserable shithole you call home. Naruto grew angry at that, standing up and glaring at the bandaged ninja. Konoha is not a shithole. It's whatever the hell I say it is. With a quick unfurling of a scroll, a multitude of wooden practice swords were scattered all over the clearing. The Nukenin wasted no time in burying Kubikirabacho into the ground, picking up a wooden sword and tossing another to Naruto. Hey, this thing's too light. You gotta train me how to use this heavy bastard. He pointed to the sword on his back for emphasis. Take that damn thing off. You're barely even worthy of holding a real sword, let alone wielding one. You need to learn how to actually hold your goddamn blade. Minutes later Naruto was standing beside the Chunin, his sword buried next to Zabuza's. I'm going to show you how to do things twice. Fuck up any more than that and I crack one of these things over one of your limbs. He brandished the wooden sword like it was the deadliest weapon on earth and he almost made it seem like it. Zabuza took a stance, then swung his blade straight down. Naruto followed his example. Resetting his stance he took another swing, imitated by Naruto. On the third, he let Naruto do it on his own, circling the blonde shinobi and quickly correcting the minor flaws in his posture. Again. The blonde did it again and Zabuza once more corrected 2 flaws in his stance. Again. This time Zabuza's wooden sword came down over his right leg in a brutally hard strike. The blonde screamed, shouting obscenities at the masked man. You'll remember to bend that knee now, won't you? The Nukenin said with absolutely no remorse at the sight of the pain, tears leaking from Naruto's eyes. Get up. Do it again. It wasn't until the sun began to set that Naruto finally collapsed. Zabuza could say he was genuinely surprised. He'd been pushing the boy hard, hitting him even harder, very nearly snapping his forearm at one point. Any normal genin would have keeled over hours ago. The genin was lying face down, panting like a dog. Zabuza turned to leave, grabbing Kubikiri before pulling it from its place in the ground. He moved to leave before 2 Konoha Anbu appeared before him in swirls of green leaves. He snarled at his would-be wardens. The fuck you want? You're not leaving him here. One answered simply. Take him with you. The Chunin turned, staring at the still out of it blonde before turning to glare at the Anbu. My job's to train the little shit. I ain't a fucking babysitter. You would do well not to infringe on Hokage-sama's sense of hospitality. The Anbu drawled. Take the boy. You will not be asked again. The demon of the hidden mist grit his teeth. He could smell a warning for what it was. The Hokage had gotten wind of his training methods, and while the old bastard was letting him get some leeway with it, this was a warning not to take it too far or suffer the consequences. The consequences today being the inconvenience of needing to take care of the exhausted little shit stain. Where does the fucker live? That is your problem. The Anbu vanished. Zabusa's face became red with pent-up fury, gnashing his teeth as he marched over to the dark sword, wrapping a thick cloth around the hilt to grab it safely in one hand before rounding on Naruto and grabbing him by the back of his jacket, carrying him one-handed to the village. When Naruto finally woke up again after his exhaustion-induced sleep, he found himself in a rather Spartan apartment with little more than a couch and 4 bare walls for a living room. Seeing his sword propped up against a wall, he stood up, groaning at the ache that spread to every nerve ending of his body despite the fast healing. He grabbed his sword, sniffing the air and hearing the sound of food hissing over a stove nearby. Soon enough, he found Haku turning some food over the skillet. The raven-haired girl looked up, surprised at seeing him. The blonde-haired genin smiled as disarmingly as he could, walking closer. He hadn't really had much chance to talk to Haku since the fight on the bridge, between both of their recoveries, the return trip where Zabusa had been all but snarling at anyone but Kakashi getting anywhere close, and the quick debrief from the tower. He hadn't shared 2 words with the taller girl. "Hi," he greeted, walking around the counter towards her. His expression fell quickly however when he noticed Haku's terrified gaze. What's wrong? Please get that thing away from me." She was shaking, staring at the sword like it was the creature from her darkest nightmares. Naruto looked from her, then back to the sword. "Oh. I'm sorry," he said hastily, turning and running back towards the living room where he propped the sword back up against the wall, where he'd found it before, coming back to the girl who was taking deep calming breaths to try and regain her composure, though her hand still seemed to be shaking. Naruto eyed the kunoichi, concerned. They'd fought, sure, but he really didn't want to scare her. He scared enough people already. "Hey, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, a little too quickly for it to be convincing. She chopped up a few more vegetables, trying to ignore her shaking hands, while Naruto floundered for what to say. Another few 10 seconds passed before Haku spoke. "I don't understand how you can even pick up that thing. I can't. I haven't even recovered the ability to mold chakra again because of it. That sword is evil." Naruto frowned sadly and decided to ignore the girl's unease, or at least try to alleviate it. Smiling his brightest smile, he sat down on the kitchen floor, looking up at her as the food continued to cook. "We never really introduced ourselves, huh? I'm Uzumaki Naruto. What's your name?" "Yuki Haku," she answered politely, albeit stiffly. The name for a moment seemed off, wrong, as though it should be different. A memory of the bridge came and went in an instant before he could fully grasp it. Naruto nodded, pushing away the thoughts, and stared up towards her like some overgrown blue-eyed puppy. "Hey, I know we were fighting and I kinda hurt you real bad, and I'm really sorry, but would you like to be friends?" Haku blinked, staring at him as though she couldn't quite comprehend the full ball of lunacy that was Uzumaki Naruto sitting in her kitchen. "You want to be friends?" Naruto nodded, his enthusiasm unperturbed by her disbelief. Haku's confused expression melted into a soft smile. "You're a strange person, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto's face scrunched up. "Is that a yes?" She laughed, the last vestiges of that cold feeling that had crawled down her spine at the sight of that dark blade leaving her. Yes, I think we could be friends, Naruto-kun." Naruto smiled, a brilliant show of pearly whites before he heard a door opening and closing. His smile fell, he turned back towards the house where he saw Zabusa round the hallway corner, toweling off his hair from a recent shower apparently, his bandages nowhere in sight allowing Naruto to see rows and rows of dagger-like teeth. The former Chunin raised a non-existent eyebrow. "You're conscious?" Naruto nodded, confused at the question. Zabusa huffed, sitting at the dismally small dining room table they had, one of his arms was enough to swallow up most of it. "It could pass for an Akimichi's high chair. Figured you'd be out until I kicked you awake in the morning. Since you're up, get the hell out of my house." Naruto was about to obey, not wanting to go anywhere near Zabusa's bad side, even if it was Sasuke's good health on the line rather than his. But before he could get up to do just that, his newfound friend came to his rescue. "Actually, Zabusa-sama, it's getting late. If Naruto leaves, he won't be able to eat by the time he gets to his apartment, and tomorrow the training will be unproductive." Zabusa stared at his subordinate, his glare swiveling from Naruto to her. For half a moment Naruto felt he was about to tell Haku to be quiet before he snorted. "Do whatever you want, Haku. You're the one he stabbed." Haku smiled. Not the least bit put off by the brusque response. Since all they had were 2 chairs, when they ate, Naruto sat on the floor, chatting happily with Haku and tried to avoid pissing off and/or annoying Zabusa too much before he eventually left back to his home. The next 2 days proceeded much the same as the first. Naruto would train and get hit by Zabusa whenever he screwed up, not stopping until he passed out. At which point, Zabusa would drag him back to the apartment, they'd eat while Naruto and Haku chatted, and then Naruto would head home. By the time the 3rd day rolled around, his routine would break a bit. Zabusa sat on the ground, watching as the genin went through the 1st and 2nd forms again, nearly flawless after several broken wood swords to go with the near-broken limbs. He came to a decision. The boy's potential improvement rate was near limitless. The human body normally needed at least a full day's rest for the muscle groups to recover from strenuous activity. Yesterday he'd put the boy through the most grueling training he could come up with, pushing him so hard the Chunin himself had needed to take a break during the exercise, though he disguised it by pacing around the Chunin and shouting at him to keep going before he lost patience. And today the boy was back, doing his forms without a care in the world, muscles working as well as ever. He thought, watching the boy for a moment before pulling out a kunai and tossing it at his outstretched hand, the blade grazing the Chunin's thumb. He dropped the sword with a yelp. "Extend yourself that far again and you'll lose that finger next time," he threatened, watching as the boy glared at him, sucking on the blood before reaching down and gripping the sword. The injury was healed. The fast healing rate, this boy could be a powerhouse in Tai and Kinjutsu in record time. Zabuza was not loyal to the Leaf, he was not a fan of being tied down here, and he liked the little shit even less for being the one to wound Haku so horribly that he actually needed trained medics for the girl. She could still barely mold chakra without feeling like her insides were sliding over razor blades. The boy had near crippled her, and he'd always resent him for that, even if she was going to recover. But he was not stupid, he was not blind. And most importantly, he was not controlled by his anger. He saw the looks the boy got whenever he dragged him through the village at the end of the day. It was the same looks bloodline users got in Kiri, or even Kisum. Some had rivaled the looks he himself had received from all the grieving parents of those worthless classmates he'd butchered in the graduation test. He didn't know why, and he didn't much care. People were ignorant, paranoid and afraid. In 3 years the seal would be gone. In 3 years he could make a break for it, with Haku and maybe this brat too. If he had even half as much potential as Zabuza suspected this healing thing could give him, then the kid would be all but unstoppable. Bigura would die, and so would any other shit stain in Kiri that didn't fall in line after he became Mizukage and ripped that three-tailed beast right out of the man's chest. The demon of the bloody mist felt their chakra signatures long before they arrived and saw them long before Naruto did. "Hi Kakashi-sensei." The boy screamed at the top of his lungs, waving enthusiastically towards the copy nin. "Did I tell you to stop?" he snarled, watching with satisfaction as the boy winced and picked up where he left off. He stood up, cracking his neck as he marched over towards the approaching Kakashi and whoever the hell the green-wearing freak was. "What do you want, copycat?" Kakashi smiled, not minding Zabuza's pleasant bedside manner. "Zabu, meet Mito Guy, Zabuza Mamachi." The Kiri Nukenin raised a non-existent eyebrow. "This is Konoha's green beast. Master of the Iron Fist." "Oh ho Kakashi, I see my reputation is a match for yours." Did you say something, Guy?" "Damn you and your hip attitude, Kakashi." The demon of the mist winced at the volume of Guy's voice. "Mama." The copy nin waved Guy off before looking to Zabuza. "This will be Naruto's new strength building sensei. He needs to have the muscles to pick up that thing properly to go with your technique." Zabuza huffed, a puff of breath out his nostrils. The last thing he wanted was for someone else to aptly discover this little secret the kid had, though, if he were honest with himself, Kakashi already knew most like, or at least he should if he trained them. The boy was pretty green and barely 3 months out of the academy. Maybe the copy nin hadn't looked into it that much yet. He would deal with this soon. "How are we working this out?" "For my new student I will arrive every day. And we shall do 10,000. At that point Zabuza droned him out. Every day, if they didn't know he'd find out soon enough. It was Kakashi's smile that tipped him off before the man ever spoke. "Ma, Zabu-chan, Naruto needs training every day to reach his full potential. You agree, don't you?" The demon of the mist didn't answer. "Call me Zabu-chan again and I'll rip out your tongue and stuff it up your ass." He turned around, making his way closer to Naruto. "Brat." He called and Naruto stopped, marching over to the three of them with a smile on his face as he was allowed to greet his sensei properly. "Hey Kakashi-sensei." "Hello, Naruto." Kakashi smiled, ruffling the blonde's hair before he gestured to Guy. "Naruto, this is Guy." Naruto looked up at Konoha's green beast, who gave off a blindingly white smile. He was about to comment on the unbelievably bushy brows the man was sporting when Guy spoke. "I am Konoha's majestic green beast and I shall be instructing you from this day onward with Zabuza-san. Together we shall make your flames of youth burn brightly. Isn't that right, Zabuza-san?" "Yeah, flames whatever. My training starts at 8, normally the kid's done by 5. So I say I take him from 8 to 12 and you take over from there." I smiled. "Wow, so I'm getting 2 sensei?" Naruto shouted, excited at the prospect. "Not exactly." Kakashi clarified, smiling gently at the blonde's crestfallen look. "Zabuza's with you for the whole 3 months. Guy-san however has his own team to train. One of his students, Lee, was injured in the last mission and it'll take him a few months to heal up." "Your student okay?" I was about to answer, and Kakashi could almost see the epic-length speech forming about Lee's brilliant flames of youth that could never be extinguished, so he interjected before the Jounin could really get going, all but jumping in front of the man. Lee-sen will be recovering in 2 months or so. So 1 month Guy-sen will help you, and the next month he'll help with Sasuke and Sakura. The 3rd month I go to his team and help train them. What are you teaching Sasuke and Sakura now? Well, seeing as how with that sword you're the most apt to be the close-range fighter of the group, I'm giving Sasuke some more control exercises and long-range techniques, and Sakura is getting some better chakra reserves and some support techniques for the two of you, like Jinjutsu and 1 or 2 healing techniques I could scrounge up. She's surprisingly good at those. Naruto nodded, eyes squinting once again. He was about to talk again before Zabuza smacked him upside the head. Enough, you've wasted enough time. I still got you for a good 20 minutes before Mido here takes over. I want the 2nd and 3rd katas, and I want them done perfectly. Naruto rubbed his head, grumbling and glaring, but shuffling back to his place nevertheless. If Zabuza could say one thing, it was that Mido guy was a brutal son of a bitch. His training was tough. Guy's training was insane. And what's worse, he could tell he'd spec the training for a 12-year-old. Whatever Guy pushed himself to do was probably 3 or 4 times worse. When he brought the brat home the first night, he hadn't even woken up to eat. But even so, the next day the boy had bounced right back full of energy and without a single sore muscle. The prospect of just what power this kid could pack if he kept this up was nearly frightening. He'd had the boy swing at a training dummy, one of the only earth-based jutsu he knew, D-ranked, with chakra the dummy could be reinforced to make it tougher. The first time he'd swung, he'd barely put any chakra into the technique, and the little Genin's sword had carved it nearly in half, but not quite the full way through. The week after Guy started he did it again. He cut the dummy with barely a sweat. Zabuza asked him to do it again. In the end, it had taken the equivalent of 8 water clones worth of chakra for the sword to get stuck in a dummy's torso. And they still had 2.5 months to go. Despite himself, Zabuza grinned. Was it so wrong in taking a little pleasure out of the notion that Kakashi's pink-haired little twat and the survivor of the Uchiha clan were going to get trounced by the one insignificant little shit he'd trained? If it was, he didn't really care. After 2 weeks with Guy, Naruto found the first break in his routine. It was a girl, with 2 buns in her hair, frowning at Guy who was in the middle of doing exercises with him. The man had yet to notice her approach, so focused on doing every single push-up with his blonde student, while Naruto felt his arms ready to fall off. "You're supposed to be training us, damn it." The shout could have given Sakura a run for her money as Tenten pulled out a hefty warhammer from a hastily unfurled scroll. Guy barely had time to look up before his lone female student was trying to bash him over the head with it. Naruto took solace in Guy's cries of pain, happy that he was not on the receiving end of brain damage for once. Then he fell flat on his face when his arms couldn't hold him up. Zabuza watched, looking up from his scroll as Guy rolled around the floor, covering his assaulted skull as he shouted apologies to the little Genin. "Stop moving and take your punishment like a man." "I am." Guy responded, still rolling and covering his head. Finally, after she was satisfied or sufficiently winded that she had to take a break, she glared at Guy, who dared to peek out from under his own hands. Tenten glared, huffing. "Just because Lee's in the hospital doesn't mean you don't have 2 other students to bloody train." I blinked. "But I left to you and Niji Kunda. The first 3 katas to the Naginata forms and an easy method for Niji to train the range of his Byakugan better, yeah. Niji's working on his. I finished mine, otherwise he'd be here beating you up instead of me." I sat up smiling. 3 katas in a week. He sniffed with pride, turning to Zabuza who was still sitting on a branch. "My student is filled with such youthful energy, Zabuza-san." The Kirinin grunted. 3 kata. "I'll believe that when I see it." Tenten turned to look at him for the first time, not recognizing his face, but the instant her gaze fell onto the Kubikirabacho strapped to his back, her eyes took on a near unholy gleam. Faster than he, or even Guy could see, the legendary weapon was off his back, in her hands and being held up towards the sun. Her eyes glimmering with tears. Kubikirabacho. One of the legendary blades of the 7 swordsmen of Kurigakure no Sado. The cleaver. The decapitating carving knife. The executioner's blade. The guillotine sword. The regenerating sword. Capable of absorbing the iron in the blood of its victims to keep itself forever whole and sharp. She may as well have been dry humping the thing. Beautiful. Zabuza reached over, grabbing the weapon by the hilt before yanking it out of her hands, glaring at the girl with irritation. She finally seemed to see him, staring at him with a look that was nearly like that of a fangirl, only much more deranged. "And you're Zabuza Mamachi with a leaf headband. You must train me in swordsmanship. I'm being paid to train him." He pointed at the still panting blonde. "So I must do nothing for you." Tenten rounded on Guy, appearing at his side in an instant. 10 seconds of animated chatting later that repeated some more Warhammer target practice against Guy's skull had the green-clad Jounin standing in front of Zabuza a moment later. Zabuza-san, how much are they paying you for Naruto-sen's training? The rank pay. Stipend standard every week for 3 months. Why? He nearly reeled as Guy stuffed a wad of cash to his chest. This should cover this week. Zabuza blinked staring at Guy. You're paying me to train your student? No. He said solemnly, as serious as Guy could ever be. His face carved out of stone as he stared at the Nukenin's eyes. I'm paying you to save me from my student. Zabuza raised a non-existent eyebrow, turning to see Tenten next to Naruto, all but bouncing on her toes in anticipation as she pulled out a sword from somewhere. Nearly 2 months later with only 2 weeks left before the Chunin exam started, Naruto's routine for the last 2 months had been simple. He and Tenten would arrive at the training grounds by 8 and practice with Zabuza on form, technique and application of weaponry. Naruto learned every detail about his sword like the back of his own hand, its length, its weight, its balance. Tenten said that despite its damaged-looking state the weapon seemed perfect. For Tenten herself, Zabuza had taken her training rather seriously after the first few days, where he saw she could indeed master katas perfectly after only a few attempts. Her form was near perfect, a finely tuned control and discipline in every muscle. Her ability to adapt herself to very nearly any weapon group could be truly devastating. Katanas, naginatas, broadswords, short swords, spears, knives, shuriken, tanto, warhammers, nunchaku, 3-piece long staff, bow staffs, flails. I mean really flails. Who in the world used flails? That and her affinity with Fu and Jutsu could be truly devastating. So he'd removed many of her weapons from her cumbersome scrolls and instead personally went to Konoha's seal specialists on Guy's dime and had them draw out individual storage seals on each one of her fingertips. The green beast had been crying all day at the sight of his empty wallet. Guy's methodology of teaching was basic with Tenten. She learned the use of one weapon at a time to full mastery, or very near it. She currently knew 3 weapons. The katana, the broadsword, knives and was learning the naginata. But Guy wasn't a kinjutsu user, he only knew how to fight kinjutsu users. And one of the things that always brought down a good kinjutsu user was predictability. No matter how well a single style could be mastered, there was always a pattern, an opening. If Tenten could freely switch between weapons and styles in a fight, she could become extremely effective. So he had her working on her sealing and unsealing speed, along with her weapon switching and stance adjustments and transfers. Would she ever be the greatest kunoichi to ever live as she dreamed? Probably not. She'd soon enough have to learn some jutsu to get a bit more punch. None of the 7 swordsmen relied solely on their kinjutsu. Mastering what he was teaching her to its very limits would make her a low jounin at best. But he wasn't teaching her any of his. That aspect would be Guy's problem for later. The kids weren't an hour into their exercises before he got his surprise of the day. Kakashi marching up towards them with his 2 other students in tow. "Kakashi-sensei." Naruto shouted, waving enthusiastically before Zabuza's kunai grazed his cheek. "Did I tell you to stop?" He growled, irritated at the moment of deja vu as Kakashi marched up to them. "Hello my and Guy's cute little genin. How has Zabuza been killing you?" "Slowly Ak." Naruto answered before Tenten smacked him across the back of the head. He dare say the girl was rather fond of the crazy Kirinin with a big sword. "What do you want, Haddock?" "Well, if I'm going to be sponsoring my team for the exams I need to see their skills." He patted Sakura and Sasuke on their heads. "Long range, support, and you've taken care of close range, so let's see it at work together now in perfect harmony." He sing-songed. He patted the 2 on the back all but pushing them towards Naruto. Sakura smiled at him while Sasuke threw a smirk. "You get any better with that thing, dope?" "Damn right I have, team. Now's your chance to prove it," Kakashi said, pulling out a single bell. "Here's how this is gonna work. 3 rounds, 1 bell each. One of you has to get the bell. Each one of you. If all 3 of you don't have a bell in 3 hours, no Chunin exam for you." "You've got to be kidding." Zabuza all but growled, shoving Kashi out of the way before forming 3 water clones from the nearby stream. "They're going into an exam with foreign genin and you want them to play tag with you?" He glared at the 3 genin, 2 of which were now decidedly uneasy. "You 3 little shits get to fight my clones. If they're not dead fast, you start losing pieces." Now Naruto looked worried. "How fast?" Zabuza smiled. Before the match could begin, each of his clones found a bell tied to their belts. He glared at Kakashi, who shrugged. "It's tradition." "You're a moron." Nearly an hour later the 3 genin were on the ground, sweating, panting and bleeding. They'd gotten in 1 lucky shot. Naruto's blade in the first exchange when it had clashed with the cloned Kubikirabacho. With a screech of rent metal the clone was dispelled. The other 2 weren't nearly so stupid to block after that. Instead, both had dodged and weaved before effectively disarming the genin, making him release the blade before tossing him away and keeping him away while fending off Kakashi's two other students. The clones may have had 1/8 the power of Zabusa, but they still had his skills, disabling Sakura's Genjutsu and closing in the distance with Sasuke to avoid his more longer-range jutsu Kakashi had been teaching him. But soon enough, with some pointers from Kakashi and Tenten shouting at the sidelines, they'd managed to get their act together. As promised though, the moment they floundered, Zabusa made sure they started loosing pieces. Sakura was sporting a rather nasty cut on her thigh, while Sasuke had a fractured wrist, 3 broken knuckles and a sprained ankle, and 2 of Naruto's ribs were broken again, by a kick again. He had the faintest impression that Zabusa clone had taken some vindictive pleasure out of it too. Currently the Jounin that had once been their enemy was sneering down at them. That was a pitiful display. "Oh, I don't know." Kakashi chimed in, smiling down at his battered students. "3 of you are more powerful than the average genin team, Zabusa-san." It was Sakura who braved the guess first. "So we're nominated." Kakashi smiled. "When the time comes for the team nominations, you 3 are in." The 3 genin of Team 7 smiled, not even Sasuke could keep up the stoic facade. Naruto stood up and began jumping around, hugging Kakashi, Sakura, much to the girl's protest, Sasuke, much to his disgust, and took 2 seconds to look at the murderous Zabusa before turning right around to hug a surprised Tenten. "We're going to the Chunin exams, Tenten." The bun-haired girl smirked, wrapping her knuckles over Naruto's head as she pulled away. "Yeah, I heard. Get ready though, I'll be there too, and if I fight you I won't hold back, Blondie." The blonde smile just got a little wider. "Naruto, there's just one thing." That brought the genin's attention back to Kakashi. "Yeah? That sword, Naruto. If you face a Konoha team in the examinations, I'd ask that you don't use it." "What?" "But Kakashi-sensei, my sword is dangerous." Kakashi interrupted flatly. "Your sword seriously crippled Haku-san for a good long while and would have killed her. And that was through just the destruction of a construct that she was actively channeling chakra into. If you were to cut someone with it, we don't know just how bad it'll be. You can't use it on a fellow team." Naruto pouted, crossing his arms even though one could tell by his face that he understood. "But Kakashi-sensei." Sakura piped up. "If Naruto's been training to use the sword, then that takes away his primary strength on the team when we face a genin team. Especially since you piped it up in front of her." Zabusa gestured to Tenten, happy to point out moments of Kakashi's idiocy. "Now her team will be gunning for them if they have half a brain between the 3 of them." Kakashi had the decency to look sheepish at Zabusa's statement before answering Sakura's. "Yes, well, that's why I stopped the training early. A week's training one-on-one between me and Naruto should let me see just how well his pure taijutsu is, and if it's not enough, give him something to let him still use his sword even against a Konoha team." "Huh? Really?" The blonde perked up. Kakashi nodded. "Yup. It's a D-rank jutsu, dulls the edges of the sword with chakra. It takes a bit of control though. So we need the extra training time." "And what about us?" Sasuke asked. "You 2 will be resting." Kakashi piped up. "You're as prepared as you need to be for the exams, and Naruto needs the extra help. You 2 have these 2 weeks off to train yourselves wherever you think you're lacking, or you can rest up. Your choice." He smiled. At their mutual shrugs, Kakashi was about ready to smile before he felt a tug on his shirt. Looking down to Naruto. "Hey Kakashi-sensei. Can I take tomorrow off? I suppose one day won't hurt. May I ask why?" Naruto suddenly blushed and Kakashi, Sakura, Sasuke and even Tenten, who didn't know him that well, felt their eyes go a little wide as he actually averted his eyes, twiddling his thumbs. "Nothin'," he mumbled. Zabusa glared suspiciously. The idle scratching of pens on paper could be heard every few seconds, the 3 examiners looking down at the sheets and muttering to each other before finally settling on a verdict before the spokesman looked up. "You say you're still recovering from an injury?" Haku nodded. "Yes, sir." The examiner took another look at his chart. "A type of chakra poisoning, yes?" She nodded again. "That's correct, sir." "And how has this affected your performance today?" "I have needed to spend roughly 10 to 18% more chakra per ninjutsu, depending on the complexity of the technique." "I see." He nodded, him and his colleague scribbling some more notes. "All that remains to be seen is your bloodline ability then, Yuki-san." Haku tensed, hesitating for a moment before she formed a single seal, her ice mirrors soon forming around the 3 examiners. Each one looked at the dome, scribbling some more before they nodded at her to continue. She bled into the mirror, her body becoming one with a thin sheet of ice. By the time the test was done, the head examiner spoke easily, his voice reaching her with a calm discipline from clear across the room without the need to shout. "Yuki-san, we shall cover the disciplines within the shinobi arts one by one, beginning with taijutsu. Your skill at Taijutsu is fairly limited, apart from your speed, which is at the adequate level expected of a Chunin, your physical strength is barely that of a Genin. Your form in the chosen Taijutsu style is good, but is far from remarkable. He turned a page. Jinjutsu. Though you know of very few, your detection skills are average for an aspiring Chunin-level shinobi, as is your skill at dispelling said Jinjutsu. Your accuracy is remarkable, well into the Jounin ranks, your knowledge of the human anatomy, specifically nerve clusters and pressure points is also quite astounding. Your ninjutsu repertoire is lacking, but the few you do know, including your bloodline, have been mastered to a significant degree. Your stealth, aided by the mist is within the ranks of a Jounin, though you are too reliant on it. The young brunette licked her lips nervously waiting as the old proctor droned on. Though some areas are in need of further training, it is our collective decision that the skills you already do have would merely be wasted in the ranks of the Genin students. As such you will instead receive the rank of Chunin. One of the Chunin assistants, the one she'd fought at Taijutsu stepped forward, a vest and a Konoha headband in hand. She took both, smiling despite herself, and the Chunin smiled back. The three proctors marched across the field, each shaking her hand with stiff professionalism as she tied the new headband around her head. She stared at the vest, listening to the others leave before a familiar voice made the smile on her face get a bit wider. Good work. Zabusa-sama. She turned finding Zabusa making his way closer, Naruto at his side, the blonde ball of energy smiling wide as can be. Haku-chan. He shouted, grabbing onto her hands. You're a Chunin. Haku smiled, doing her best to ignore that accursed sword strapped to Naruto's back. Yes. She giggled. You'll be one soon too, Naruto-kun. He grinned, still holding onto her hands as he turned to Zabusa. We're gonna go celebrate, right? Zabusa eyed the blonde little bastard that had followed him here. You paying? Naruto pouted. Oh come on. 2 B-rank mission pay. You can afford it. I'm a Genin that's been off the roster for 3 months. Haku giggled, smiling brightly up at Zabusa. He's got you there, Zabusa-sama. The Kiri swordsman rolled his eyes. Whatever. Come on then Haku, you get to pick the place. This is Cyclops with Beast. Targets are in sight. This is Devil here. On my way. Lies with knives en route. Avenging Shadow, what the fuck am I doing? Youthful Shadow. You are. SHH, they'll hear you. It didn't take Zabusa long to figure out they were being tailed. Kakashi and Guy could have hidden on their own, but the Genin were amateurs. Because of them he discovered the Jounin. He was very disappointed in Haku, who was too busy being distracted by the blonde little shit to pay attention enough to discover the same thing. After a few irritating seconds he decided to go see what this was all about. Wait here a bit. He growled, vanishing in a swirl of water to reappear in front of Guy and Kakashi 3 blocks away. What the hell's going on? If this is a stealth exercise, your team's failing spectacularly. Kakashi smiled up from his place behind some bushes. Actually, we just wanted to see how little Naruto's first date was going. Zabusa nearly reeled. First date. Kakashi smiled a bit wider. Yes. I'd say little Naru is quite smitten with Haku-chan. Don't you agree, Guy? I nodded. His smile nearly blinding. Yes. The flames of youth never burn brighter than when they burn with the passions of love. A part of Zabusa wanted to scoff really. But when he turned around and saw Haku in the distance happily laughing with a blonde little shit and heard only Guy's fleeting words of youth, flames, passion and love going round and round in his head, all the Kiri swordsman saw was red. He gripped Kubikirabacho, drawing the blade from its place on his back, his eyes turning to red unholy pits as his chakra flared like a flame around his body, the killing intent so palpable it made civilians faint around him. I'll gut him like a fly. He was cut off as Kakashi and Guy grabbed a hold of him, with Guy tackling his legs and Kakashi going for the arms, making sure the raging Kiri swordsman wouldn't be doing any gutting today. With Naruto and Haku, Guy's distant cry of the flames of youth's love must not be extinguished, along with the bestial growl of some demon, was lost to the cacophony of city-goers. Soon enough, Zabusa returned looking as gruff as usual. Is everything alright, Zabusa-sama? Zabusa shrugged. Yeah, the fossil in the office is calling. I'll be back later. He tossed him a wad of cash which Naruto caught. Go somewhere nice. You know, something that doesn't have ramen on the menu. With a swirl of water he was gone. This is Lies with Knives, Devil and me heard a disturbance on our end over here. What's up? This is Cyclops. Beast and I have Butcher in custody over. Avenging Shadow, status. They're deciding where to go again, what the fuck am I doing here? This is Devil, target Sunshine and target Ice Queen are moving. Pursue targets. Repeat, pursue targets. Beast, stay with the prisoner. So where do you want to go, Haku-chan? Naruto asked. His first instinct had been Ichiraku, but Zabusa and a niggling little voice at the back of his head was telling him to go elsewhere. I heard of a good BBQ place near the apartments. We could go there. Haku offered. Naruto thought for a moment. I think I know where it is. Come on. He grabbed at her hand, not quite running, but still pulling her along behind him. It wasn't long before they arrived at the restaurant, with Naruto taking a booth table to let them both sit comfortably across from each other. This is Devil. Sunshine has not gone to Ichiraku as Intel suggested. This is Cyclops. Where's he gone then? Akimichi, BBQ place. Oh, that's not a bad choice. Lies with knives here, the choice has made us lose sight of the target. Orders Cyclops. Avenging Shadow, move to infiltrate under Henge. Devil, knives, cover the exits, report any movement. This is completely asinine. This is a direct order from your superior officer. Your mission pay will be deducted, and if you refuse to obey an order again, disciplinary charges will be filed. This isn't even a mission. We're not getting paid for this. You just randomly dragged me out of my house. I thought we were gonna go for training, but then suddenly I'm dragged out here to follow the dope. I'm not even sure if this is legal. Is this legal? Avenging Shadow Cyclops began carefully. This is a potentially dangerous enemy, Kunoichi. She could harm Sunshine. Give me a moment to actually start giving a damn. If he dies, all the paperwork and complications will mean you won't be able to enter the exams, and, if you don't help, I won't nominate you. This is Avenging Shadow, entering target location in guise of older civilian male, dark brown hair, mid-40s. So how's it feel to be a Chunin? Naruto asked, smiling across to the girl. Haku shrugged. Strange, honestly. Zabusa-sama and I left Kiri before I ever entered the academy. I never even became an official genin. Having a rank now seems a little strange, truth be told. And I'm nervous about working with other people. I've never worked with anyone besides Zabusa-sama. You'll do great. The blonde proclaimed, not a hint of doubt in his voice. You're already strong and you worked with those weird demon guys too, right? Haku shook her head. No. The demon brothers joined forces with Zabusa-sama on occasion when it was convenient for everyone, but I never actually fought alongside them. Naruto frowned, but then brightened. Well, there's no time like the present to learn. You're already making friends in the village. Haku tried to smile, refusing to point out that outside of Zabusa he in fact was her only friend, even if he did carry a sword that absolutely terrified her. Naruto. Thanks for watching, also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.